What happens when a woman who gave up everything for love discovers that love was a lie? This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's a story of chilling betrayal and masterful revenge. For months, Elara Vance believed she was living a fairy tale, pregnant with the child of charming tech millionaire Julian Croft. But while Julian was sleeping in the arms of his mistress, he was also plotting to cast his pregnant wife aside with nothing. He underestimated her. He forgot who she was before she met him. And in one single silent night, while he dreamt of his future, she took hers back, draining every dollar from his empire and vanishing into thin air. This is the story of how she did it. The silence in the house was the most expensive thing Julian Croft owned. It was a deep, velvety silence, purchased with triple-paned acoustic glass acres of secluded woodland in the hills above San Francisco, and a staff that moved with the ghostly quiet of shadows. For Elara Vance, now Elara Croft. For the past 3 years, that silence had once felt like peace. Now, it felt like a tomb. She stood in the center of their cavernous walk-in closet, a space larger than her first apartment in the city. Racks of Julian's custom-tailored suits. Tom Ford Brioni stood like a disciplined army on one side. Her own wardrobe, a vibrant collection of couture he'd curated for her, faced his in a riot of color and silk. He called her his exotic bird, and this was her golden kit lined with Dior and Chanel. Elara ran a hand over her belly, where the slight, firm curve of her 5-month pregnancy was now undeniable. This child, their son, was supposed to be the final perfect piece of their perfect life. The heir to the Croft tech dynasty. But the joy she'd felt during the first trimester had curdled into a cold, hard knot of dread in her stomach. The betrayal hadn't been a sudden, shattering event. It was a slow poison, seeping into the foundations of their marriage. It began with the little things. The late nights at the office that stretched into sunrises. The business trips to Singapore and Zurich that left him smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers. A faint, cloying scent of jasmine and sandalwood. The way he angled his phone away from her, a screen that had once been an open book, now a dark, reflective secret. Julian was a creature of habit and immense arrogance. It was this combination that became his undoing. He believed he was too smart to be caught, and Elara was too docile, too in love to ever suspect him. He was wrong on both counts. The first real crack in the facade appeared a month ago. He'd left his secondary phone, the one he claimed was for international business, charging on the nightstand, an almost laughably amateur mistake. At 2 a.m., as Elara lay awake, wrestling with pregnancy-induced insomnia, it lit up, not with a call or a text, but a calendar notification. Siena, the St. Regis, 9 p.m. Don't be late. Siena. The name was elegant, exotic. It sounded expensive, just like everything else in Julian's life. Elara's heart had hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. Her first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to shatter the placid surface of their lives. But a deeper, colder instinct took over. An instinct she thought she'd buried long ago from a life before Julian. Before she was Elara Croft society wife, she was Elara Vance, a forensic accountant for a top firm in New York. Her job had been to follow the money to find the rot hidden beneath layers of complex transactions and corporate lies. She was a hunter of financial predators. She'd given it all up for Julian, believing she'd found a love that made her old life of suspicion and numbers seem grey and meaningless. Now she realized she hadn't given it up. She had merely been dormant. That night, she didn't sleep. She slipped out of bed and went to her home office, a sterile white space that she rarely used. She turned on her encrypted laptop and began to dig. She started not with his phone, but with his money. Money never lied. Julian's finances were a labyrinth of shell corporations, offshore holding companies, and blind trusts designed to minimize taxes and maximize secrecy. To any normal person, it would be impenetrable. To Elara, it was a language she spoke fluently. She still had access to the master accounts, a sign of his ultimate arrogance. He'd given her access as a grand romantic gesture when they married, a symbol of their partnership, never imagining she possessed the skill to truly comprehend, let alone navigate the system. For weeks she spent her nights mapping his empire. While he slept, or while he was out at his business dinners, she was a ghost in the machine, tracing wire transfers, analyzing credit card statements, and cross-referencing expense reports. And there she was, Sienna Dubois, a name that appeared again and again. A penthouse apartment in a new development downtown, paid for by a shell corporation linked to Julian. A black Amex card, a supplementary on an account Elara had never seen, racking up charges at designer boutiques and five-star hotels around the world. Flights that mirrored Julian's own travel schedule, but in first class, one row behind him. He wasn't just having an affair. He was funding a parallel life. The pain was immense, a physical blow that left her breathless. But the forensic accountant in her was dispassionate. Pain was data. It fueled her. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. It wasn't just the money. It was the meticulous planning, the years of lies that underpinned every "I love you," every tender touch. But the catalyst, the event that turned her from a woman betrayed into an avenging angel, came last Tuesday. Julian was on a conference call in his home office, the heavy oak doors shut. He thought they were soundproof. They were not. Elara was walking past on her way to the kitchen when she heard his voice low and sharp. He wasn't talking about algorithms or stock prices. He was talking about her. "The prenup is ironclad, Marcus," he was saying, his voice stripped of all its usual charm. She recognized the name. Marcus Thorne, Julian's notoriously ruthless attorney. But the pregnancy complicates things. The optics are terrible. Elara froze her hand flat against the wall, her blood turning to ice. "We can't have a messy public divorce," Julian continued, his tone like flint. "Not with the IPO next year. I need to control the narrative. We'll build a case. Unstable, hormonal, emotionally erratic. We can get a psych evaluation ordered. We'll prove she's an unfit mother." An unfit mother. The word struck her with the force of a physical assault. He was going to take her son. "And the settlement." Marcus's voice was a tinny rasp over the speakerphone. "The prenup gives her a one-time payout of $1 million. A pittance. An insult. She'll fight it, of course. But once we have the leverage of the child, she'll fold. She'll take the deal and disappear. She can see the boy on supervised visits twice a year. If she behaves." Elara had to clamp a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. It wasn't a sob of sadness. It was a sob of pure, unadulterated rage. He wasn't just going to leave her. He was going to erase her, paint her as a lunatic, and steal the only thing in the world that now mattered. He was going to use their child as a weapon to destroy her. In that moment, standing in the cold, silent hallway of her gilded cage, the heartbroken wife died. And the forensic accountant was reborn armed with a mother's fury. He wanted to leave her with nothing. She would leave him with less. She backed away from the door silently, her mind a maelstrom of calculations. This was no longer about a broken heart. This was war, and she would not lose. She went to her office and locked the door. She pulled up the financial maps she had created, the labyrinth of his wealth. She saw the load-bearing walls, the critical junctions, the keystones that held the entire arch of his fortune together. And she began to draft a plan. Not a plan for divorce, but a plan for demolition. She needed an ally, someone she could trust implicitly, someone with a skill set that complemented her own. She picked up her burner phone, a simple, untraceable device she'd bought with cash weeks ago, and typed a single message to the only number saved in it. Her brother, Liam Vance. Liam was the black sheep of their family, a cybersecurity genius who lived in a messy apartment in Oakland and worked as a white-hat hacker for a boutique security firm. He saw the world in lines of cut and firewalls. He'd always despised Julian, calling him a charismatic sociopath from the day they met. Elara had dismissed it as sibling jealousy. Now she saw it as the clear-eyed truth. Her message was simple. Operation Bonaparte. Are you in? It was a code from their childhood, a reference to Napoleon's escape from Elba. Their shorthand for a plan that was audacious, risky, and had to be executed with military precision. The reply came back in less than 30 seconds. For you, I'd go to war with God. Send me the coordinates. The plan had a name. Now it needed a timeline. Elara pulled up Julian's calendar again. In 2 weeks, he was scheduled to fly to their villa in Lake Como for a solo retreat to decompress before the next quarter. The flight records she'd pulled showed a second ticket booked for Siena Dubois. They would be together an ocean away, tangled in sheets that Elara's money, their money, had paid for. They would be sleeping, and she would be working. For the next 2 weeks, Elara played the part of the devoted, glowing, expectant mother. She feigned morning sickness, discussed nursery colors, and smiled lovingly when he touched her stomach. Every smile was a lie. Every touch felt like a spider crawling on her skin. She was a ghost in her own life, observing, gathering, preparing. She meticulously collected the final pieces of the puzzle, the security protocols for the private banking portals in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, the vocal authentication phrases for his stockbroker, the seed phrases for his various cryptocurrency cold storage wallets, which she found on a thumb drive hidden in a hollowed-out copy of The Art of War in his office. The irony was so bitter it was almost sweet. Liam worked on his end, setting up a series of virtual private networks, VPNs, that would route her digital activity through a dozen countries in a matter of seconds, making her online presence untraceable. He also prepared a clean slate package for her, a new identity, a passport, a driver's license, and a string of bank accounts in a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. He was her digital ghost maker. The night before Julian's flight, he was in a magnanimous mood. He presented her with a gift. It was a velvet box. Inside was a ridiculously large diamond necklace. For the most beautiful mother-to-be in the world, he said, his voice smooth as silk. Elara felt a wave of nausea, and it had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She allowed him to fasten it around her neck, its weight cold against her skin. It's beautiful, Julian. Thank you. I'll miss you, he whispered, kissing her forehead. I'll call you every day from Como. I'll be waiting, she replied, meeting his eyes in the mirror. Her reflection was a stranger, a woman with a serene smile and eyes as hard as the diamonds at her throat. He would be sleeping beside his mistress, and she would be waiting, not for his call, but for the moment to burn his kingdom to the ground. The flight to Milan took off at 10:05 p.m. Pacific time. Elara watched its icon crawl across the flight tracker app on her burner phone until it was a tiny speck over the Atlantic. Julian would be settling into his private suite on the upper deck of the A380, sipping vintage champagne. Sienna would be a few rows back, perhaps, sending him a discreet, thrilling text. The performance had begun. Elara's own performance was over. The moment the front door clicked shut behind him, the demure, smiling mask fell away. She walked through the silent, opulent house, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. She went to the closet and took off the diamond necklace. She didn't put it back in its velvet box. She let it drop onto the plush carpet, where it lay like a glittering snake. It was a shackle she would no longer wear. Her command center was her sterile white home office, now transformed. A second monitor, brought in by Liam 2 days prior, sat next to her encrypted laptop. A cooling fan hummed softly. On the desk sat a flask of lukewarm chamomile tea, 3 protein bars, and a high-capacity power bank. This was her war room. The battle would last approximately 8 hours, the window of opportunity between Julian falling asleep on the plane and his bank in Geneva opening for business. She put on a headset and initiated a secure end-to-end encrypted call to Liam. Stage 1. Are you green? Elara's voice was calm, devoid of emotion. Green across the board. Liam's voice crackled back, equally steady. I'm looking at the Croft network infrastructure right now. It's a fortress as is. But he left a key under the mat. The smart home integration, she stated not asked. The very same, Liam confirmed. He linked everything security cameras, climate control, the bank-grade server in the basement to a single IoT hub for convenience. The hub's security is top tier, but the firmware has a tiny vulnerability. I'm in. I have control of the internal network. I can see every packet of data moving in and out of this house. If any silent alarms trip, I'll kill them before they can phone home. You're invisible. Elara took a deep breath. Okay. I'm going in. Her strategy was a cascade designed for maximum speed and impact. She wouldn't just drain one account. She would trigger a simultaneous multi-front financial cataclysm. She had a list prioritized by liquidity and security. First target, the domestic accounts, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase. These were the most visible, but held the least amount of his actual wealth, around $15 million in checking, savings, and money market accounts. This was Julian's operational cash. It was also the most easily traceable. This had to be the final step, the one that would raise the first alarm. She would come back to it. Second target. The brokerage accounts, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs. This was the bulk of his liquid net worth outside of his company's stock. Hundreds of millions in equities, bonds, and mutual funds. Accessing it required not just a password, but a 2-factor authentication code sent to Julian's primary phone. His phone was currently at 35,000 feet, set to airplane mode. Useless to him. But not to her. Liam, I'm initiating the login for the Morgan Stanley portal. I need you to intercept the 2FA. Ready, he said. Elara typed in the username and the complex password J. Croft to loves the game 77. She'd figured it out weeks ago. It was a variation of the password he used for his fantasy football league. His arrogance again was her greatest asset. The portal prompted for the 6-digit code. "It's sent. Go." "Got it," Liam said after a tense 4-second pause. The SMS was rerouted to a virtual number, then to me. "I'm seeing the packet. Code is 844291. Elara's fingers flew across the keyboard. 844291. Access granted. She was in. A dizzying array of numbers and stock symbols filled the screen. A portfolio worth over $250 million. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She had rehearsed this in her mind 100 times. She didn't sell everything at once. That would trigger market alerts and trading halts. Instead, she executed a series of carefully calculated block trades, selling off large positions in highly liquid blue-chip stocks, Apple, Microsoft, Google, and converting them to cash. The money appeared in the core settlement account. Now to move it. She couldn't wire it directly to her new accounts. That was a red flag. This is where the labyrinth of shell corporations came into play. Over the past 3 years, Julian had occasionally used her name to set up small LLCs for investment purposes. They were empty shells, forgotten entities he'd used to shuffle money around. She had quietly legally taken full control of 3 of them. From the Morgan Stanley account, she initiated a series of wire transfers, each just under the $1 million mark, to avoid triggering enhanced scrutiny. The recipient was not a person, but Vance Holdings, LLC, for consulting services rendered. Then from Vance Holdings, the money would make another hop to a second shell, and then a third, before finally being wired to its ultimate destination, a newly opened corporate account at a private bank in Liechtenstein under the name Helvetia Strategic Solutions, an entity controlled by one Elara Vance. It was a painstaking process. Login, authenticate, sell wire. Login, authenticate, sell wire. For 2 solid hours, the only sounds were the clicking of her keyboard and the low hum of the computers. She repeated the process with the Goldman Sachs account, Liam flawlessly intercepting the 2FA codes each time. The numbers in the Liechtenstein account grew at a staggering rate. Third target. The offshore fortresses. Pictet Group, Geneva Butterfield Bank, Cayman Islands. This was the old money, the truly dark money. Hidden, protected by layers of international law and banking secrecy. This was the hardest part. The security here was biometric. To access the Pictet account, Julian used a vocal authentication system. "You need to give me your best, Julian," Liam said, a hint of gallows humor in his voice. Elara had prepared for this. She had hours of recordings of Julian's voice from his podcast, interviews, his keynote speeches, and most usefully from a recording she'd made of him dictating notes in his office. Using open-source AI software, she had stitched his words together, creating a digital voice print. It was a long shot. She initiated the call to the Pictet private banking hotline. A crisp Swiss-German voice answered. "Pictet Group, how may I assist you? I need to authorize a transfer." Elara said, her own voice disguised by a voice-altering software Liam had provided. "Of course. Please state your name and account number for verification." She provided the details. "Thank you, Mr. Croft. And now for vocal authentication, please state the phrase, 'The mountain air is the clearest.'" This was the moment of truth. Elara clicked her mouse. The synthesized voice of her husband, a perfect digital mimicry, spoke from her computer. "The mountain air is the clearest." An agonizing silence followed. Elara held her breath. Had she made the vowels too long? Was the cadence off, verification successful? The banker said, his tone unchanged. How may we direct your funds, Mr. Croft? A wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy washed over Elara. She quickly dictated the instructions, transferring the entire balance, a shocking 180 million euros, to the same Liechtenstein account. She used a prearranged excuse about consolidating assets ahead of a new tech venture. The banker didn't question it. His job was to follow instructions from a verified client. The Cayman Islands account was even more difficult. It required a physical security key, a small USB device that generated a one-time cryptographic signature. Julian kept his on his person at all times, except for the spare, which he kept in the back of his office safe. A safe she had learned the combination to by watching him through a strategically placed nanny cam, disguised as a smoke detector a month ago. The transfer was made. Another $95 million joined the torrent of cash flowing into her control. Fourth target, the untouchable, cryptocurrency. Julian had been an early adopter of crypto. He'd bragged to her once, after too much wine, that his crypto portfolio was his apocalypse insurance, completely untraceable and untouchable. He kept the private keys in cold storage on a Ledger Nano X, the very thumb drive she'd found in his copy of The Art of War. This was Liam's territory. He guided her through the process of connecting the ledger, accessing the wallets, and transferring the contents, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a dozen other altcoins to a new anonymous wallet that only she and Liam knew existed. The value fluctuated by the second, but it was well over 50 million final target. The insult. The sun was beginning to cast a faint grey light over the hills outside. It was 6 a.m. The European banks were open. The New York Stock Exchange would open in 2 hours. The window was closing. It was time for the domestic accounts. Elara logged into the Bank of America portal. No complex security here, just a simple password. She looked at their joint checking account, a balance of 786 tons, 452,19. This was their life account. Mortgages, staff salaries, her allowance. It was all paid from here. She transferred the entire amount down to the last cent to one of her shell companies. Then she paused. With a grim smile, she initiated one final transfer into the account. A deposit. For $100. She did the same for his personal checking account at Chase, emptied it completely, and deposited a single $1, enough for a cup of coffee or a bus ticket. It was over. She leaned back in her chair, her body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. She looked at the final tally on a spreadsheet she'd kept open. She had systematically liquidated and transferred just over $500 million. "Liam," she whispered into the headset, her voice hoarse. "It's done. Phase 1 is complete." "Jesus, Elara," he breathed. "I'm looking at the logs. It's a thing of beauty. A digital guillotine. You didn't just rob him. You completely erased his financial identity." "Phase 2, she said, already moving her mind, focused on the next step. The data. Julian's server in the basement didn't just run the house. It contained his life. Every email, every document, every contract. And most importantly, a hidden encrypted partition labeled contingency. She'd discovered it during her nightly explorations. Liam had already broken the encryption. It was Julian's blackmail folder. Dirt on business rivals, politicians, and even his own board members. It was his ultimate leverage, and now it was hers. "I'm initiating the download to the secure cloud server," Liam said. "It's 800 gigs. It'll take about 20 minutes. After it's done, I'll wipe the source drive. I mean, really wipe it. Department of Defense level scrub. There won't be a single byte left." While the data transferred, Elara moved through the house. She took nothing of value. Not the jewelry, not the art, not the clothes. She packed a single suitcase with practical items, the burner phones, her new passport, and the crypto ledger. The things she owned before Julian, and the tools of her new life. She walked into their bedroom. The indentation of his head was still on the pillow next to hers. She felt nothing. She went into the bathroom and took out the pregnancy test that had started it all, the one she'd saved with its 2 triumphant pink lines. She placed it squarely on his pillow. Her phone buzzed. It was Liam. "Download complete. Wiping the drive now. You need to go, Elara. Get out of there. The digital trail is gone. Now the physical one has to disappear too." She walked down the grand staircase for the last time. In the foyer, she paused and looked at a large framed portrait of her and Julian on their wedding day. They looked so happy, so full of hope. It was all a lie. She took the single house key from her purse, placed it on a marble table beneath the portrait, and walked out the front door, not bothering to lock it behind her. An untraceable car service she had booked was waiting for her at the bottom of the long, winding driveway. The sun was rising. It was the first day of her new life, and the last day of Julian Croft's. He just didn't know it yet. Julian Croft woke up to the gentle rocking of the descent into Milan, and the syrupy voice of a flight attendant offering him a hot towel. He felt magnificent. The 8-hour flight had been a blissful, dreamless void. He'd spent the first 2 hours texting Sienna, building the anticipation for their week together, before sliding into a deep, untroubled sleep. He was a master of the universe, flying toward his mistress in his private sky throne, his perfect life and pregnant wife waiting patiently for him back home. He deplaned, breezed through a private customs channel, and found Sienna waiting for him just beyond the gate. She was stunning, wearing a white linen dress that clung to her in the humid Italian air. He kissed her deeply, a public display of ownership. "I missed you," she murmured against his lips. "The wait is over," he said, taking her hand and leading her toward the waiting black Mercedes that would spirit them away to Lake Como. The first sign of trouble was innocuous. As they settled into the plush leather seats for the hour-long drive, Julian took out his Amex Centurion card to pay the private handler who had expedited their arrival. "My apologies, Mr. Croft," the man said with a slight bow, handing the card back. "It has been declined." Julian stared at the man, then at the card. Declined. That was impossible. It was a card with, for all practical purposes, no limit. He must have swiped it. "Run it again," he commanded, his voice sharp with annoyance. The man did. The result was the same. A flicker of irritation crossed Julian's face. He handed the man a different card, a J.P. Morgan Reserve card. Declined. Sienna watched, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything all right, darling?" "It's nothing." Julian snapped his face, flushing. He pulled a thick roll of euros from his travel wallet and peeled off several €100 notes, thrusting them at the handler. "A network issue with the American banks. It happens." But a cold seed of unease had been planted. Throughout the scenic drive, as the majestic Alps rose around them, Julian was uncharacteristically silent. He kept checking his phone, trying to access his banking apps. Each one met with a new baffling error message: invalid credentials. Please contact customer support. He tried to reset a password. The The request for a confirmation code went to his email. When he tried to log into his email, that too was blocked. Unusual activity has been detected on your account. Access has been suspended. By the time they arrived at the grand waterfront villa in Como, Julian's mood had soured completely. The majestic view of the shimmering lake and the charming village of Bellagio across the water did nothing to soothe him. He left Siena to direct the staff with the luggage and retreated to the study, slamming the door behind him. He needed to call his private banker at Morgan Stanley. He dialed the number from memory. "Mr. Croft," said his longtime banker, David Chen. "Good morning, or I suppose good afternoon for you. I was expecting your call." "David, what the hell is going on?" Julian barked. "None of my cards are working. I'm locked out of everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When David spoke again, his voice was strained formal. "Julian, according to our records, you initiated a full liquidation of your portfolio, starting at approximately 11 p.m. Pacific time last night. All assets were converted to cash and wired out." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. "What? That's insane." "I was on a plane. I didn't authorize anything. We have the logs," David said, his voice now cold and professional. "The login was successful. The two-factor authentication codes were all verified. The wire transfers were made to a holding company. It was all done under your credentials. As of 3:45 a.m. this morning, your account balance with us is 0. 0. Julian whispered the word. It felt alien in his mouth. "The same activity was reported at Goldman." David added his voice low. "And I received automated alerts from the correspondent banks in Geneva and the Caymans. Your accounts there have been emptied. Julian, someone has systematically dismantled your entire liquid financial profile in under 8 hours. We've flagged it as a potential high-level breach, but the digital footprint is a ghost. It's routed through half the world and disappears in Liechtenstein. The authorities have been notified." Julian's phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the marble floor. He sank into a leather chair, his mind reeling. This wasn't a hack. A random hacker would have been messy, would have tripped alarms. This was precise. This was surgical. This was personal. And then a thought so monstrous and unbelievable it almost made him laugh. Elara. No. Impossible. Sweet, docile Elara. The woman who couldn't even balance a checkbook, who thought a stock option was a menu item. She couldn't have done this. She wouldn't have the first clue. He snatched up the phone and dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. He called the house landline. It rang and rang unanswered in the vast, empty mansion. Panic, a sensation Julian hadn't felt since he was a teenager, began to claw at his throat. He called Marcus Thorne, his lawyer. "Marcus," he yelled when the man answered. "It's gone. Everything. The money is gone." "Julian, calm down and tell me what happened." Marcus's voice was a splash of ice water. Julian explained the situation in frantic, clipped sentences. The declined cards, the locked accounts, the call with David Chen. When he finished, there was a long silence on the line. "It's her, Marcus," Julian breathed. "It has to be her." "Your wife?" Marcus sounded skeptical. "Julian, with all due respect, she plans charity galas, not financial coups." "You don't know her," Julian shouted, pacing the room like a caged animal. There was a life before me. She worked in finance, forensic accounting. I thought it was a cute little hobby. Forensic accounting, Marcus repeated slowly, the gravity of the words sinking in. Oh my God. Julian, stay where you are. I'm getting on the first flight to SFO. I'll go to the house. Find out what's happened. Don't talk to anyone. The wait was torture. Sienna tried to talk to him, to soothe him, but he waved her away with a snarl. She retreated, her face pale with fear and confusion, leaving him alone with his spiraling thoughts. Hours later, Marcus called back. His voice was grim. I'm at the house, Julian. The police are here. I told them you suspected a break-in. And, Julian demanded. There's no sign of forced entry, but she's gone. Her clothes are here, her jewelry. Everything, except a single suitcase. The staff hasn't seen her since you left. What did you find? Marcus cleared his throat. In your office, the safe is open. It's empty. In the bedroom, Julian. She left something for you on your pillow. What was it? A pregnancy test, the positive one. Julian let out a strangled cry. It was a message. She wasn't just taking the money. She was taking his son. His heir. And the server in the basement, Marcus continued, his voice dropping lower. It's been wiped, professionally. There's nothing left. Julian, whatever was on there is gone. Or rather, someone else has it now. The blackmail files, his leverage, his power, gone. Julian Croft, the millionaire tech mogul. The master of the universe was standing in a borrowed villa in Italy with no access to money. His empire hollowed out his darkest secrets in the hands of his pregnant runaway wife. He wasn't a king anymore. He was just a man in a castle of ash. Find her, Julian whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. I don't care what it costs. Use every resource, every PI, every contact we have. I want her found, Marcus. I want my son, and I want her to pay for this. Find Elara Vance. The hunt had begun, but Elara was no longer Elara Croft, or even Elara Vance. Thousands of miles away, a woman named Anna Muller stepped off a train in a sleepy, picturesque town nestled in the Austrian Alps. She wore simple clothes, her hair was cut shorter and dyed a mousy brown. She carried a single suitcase and a backpack. She was visibly pregnant and looked like any other European woman seeking quiet and fresh mountain air. She checked into a modest, clean guest house she had booked months in advance, paying for 3 months up front in cash. The room had a small balcony that overlooked a valley of breathtaking beauty. That evening she sat on the balcony, wrapped in a warm blanket, sipping herbal tea. She logged on to her new laptop, connecting to the internet via a secure, anonymous satellite link Liam had arranged. She opened a single file, a live feed of the financial markets. She watched as the first reports began to surface on niche financial blogs. Unusual trading activity detected in Croft Technologies linked accounts. Rumors of a massive coordinated breach against CEO Julian Croft. A small grim smile touched Anna Muller's lips. The world was beginning to notice, but they were looking for a hacker, a shadowy syndicate. They would never think to look for a pregnant woman in a tiny Austrian village. She placed a hand on her belly, where she felt a faint, fluttering kick. We're safe now, little one, she whispered to her unborn son. Her voice carried away by the clean, cold mountain wind. We're free. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it was only a matter of time before Julian's rage found its way across the ocean. This was just the end of the beginning. The following weeks were a study in contrasts. For Julian Croft, they were a descent into a special kind of hell, one reserved for the powerful, who suddenly find themselves powerless. For Ilara, now living and breathing as Anna Müller, they were a quiet, nerve-wracking renaissance. Julian's life imploded with spectacular speed. The news of his financial wipeout could not be contained. It bled from niche financial blogs into the mainstream press. Tech titan Julian Croft victim of unprecedented cyber heist, screamed one headline. Croft's fortune vanishes overnight, cried another. His company's board of directors, already jittery about the upcoming IPO, went into panic mode. The IPO was indefinitely postponed. His reputation, once his most valuable asset, was now toxic. He was a prisoner in his own mansion. He couldn't pay his staff, who quickly departed. He couldn't pay the legion of landscapers, pool cleaners, and security guards. The grand house began to feel less like a palace and more like a mausoleum gathering dust. He lived on takeout food, paid for by Marcus Thorne's corporate card, a daily humiliation that gnawed at him. His rage was a living entity. He and Marcus turned the mansion's dining room into a war room. A massive whiteboard was installed covered in maps, timelines, and potential leads. They hired the best private investigators money could buy, or rather that Marcus's firm could front him. They scoured flight manifests, border crossings, and financial transaction records. But they found nothing. Ilara had vanished as if she'd never existed. There was no record of an Ilara Croft or Ilara Vance leaving the country. Her credit cards were untouched. Her bank accounts were dormant. She had become a ghost. The only clue was Liam. They knew he was her brother. They knew his skill set. Julian's investigators descended on Liam's life, but he was just as clean. He'd wiped his own digital tracks with the same professional precision. When investigators showed up at his apartment, he was calm, cooperative, and expressed deep, convincing concern for his missing sister, whom he claimed to believe had been abducted by the same people who stole Julian's money. He was an unshakable wall of plausible deniability. "She's smarter than we thought," Marcus conceded one evening, staring at the blank whiteboard. "She didn't just run. She executed a pre-planned exfiltration. She had help, professional help. It was her brother," Julian hissed, slamming his fist on the table. "I know it was. Knowing it and proving it are two different worlds, Julian. And even if we could prove it, he's not the one with your $500 million. Julian's only hope, his only focus, was Sienna. He interrogated her relentlessly. He replayed every conversation she'd ever had with Ilara, every chance encounter. Sienna, terrified and trapped, racked her brain. "She was always so quiet, so polite," Sienna sobbed during one of their sessions. "We barely spoke. She talked about the baby, about wanting to raise him somewhere with fresh air, away from the city." "Fresh air? The whole world has fresh air," Julian roared. "No, wait," Sienna said, her eyes widening. "There was one thing. A long time ago at a charity auction, she was looking at a painting, a landscape. She had this wistful look on her face. I asked her about it. She said it reminded her of a place her grandmother used to take her as a girl. A place she said was the most peaceful on earth." Julian leaned forward, his eyes boring into her. "What place, Sienna?" "What was the name of the place?" "Hallstatt," Sienna whispered. "She said it was a tiny village on a lake in Austria." It was a sliver, a ghost of a memory. But it was more than they'd had in a month. Marcus immediately dispatched a team of his best investigators, discreet European-based operatives, to the Salzkammergut region of Austria. Their instructions were simple. Don't look for Ilara Croft. Look for a pregnant, single American woman who arrived about a month ago. Blend in, watch, wait. Meanwhile, in Hallstatt, Elara, as Anna Müller had settled into a rhythm. Her life was simple, monastic. She woke early, took long, slow walks along the edge of the crystal-clear lake, bought fresh bread and cheese from the local market, and spent her afternoons reading books on motherhood and child development. The town, with its charming 16th-century houses clinging to the mountainside, was a balm to her soul. For the first time in years, she felt the silence not as an oppressive void, but as genuine peace. She kept track of Julian's downfall through the news. She felt a grim satisfaction, but no joy. Her goal had not been to revel in his destruction, but to secure her and her son's survival. She also had a second, more powerful insurance policy: the blackmail files. Liam had helped her set up a dead man's switch. A secure server was loaded with the most damning of Julian's files, curated into neat folders, labeled with the names of board members, politicians, and business rivals. If Elara failed to log in and reset a countdown timer every 72 hours, the server would automatically email the contents of those folders to the people involved, as well as to a list of major international news outlets. It was a weapon of mutually assured destruction. As long as she was safe, Julian's secrets were safe. If she disappeared, so did his world. The first sign that her peace was about to be shattered came in the form of a man in a tweed jacket. She saw him at the local cafe, reading a German newspaper, but holding it like a man who didn't speak the language. She saw him again the next day near the funicular railway, ostensibly taking pictures, but with his lens pointed more often toward the town square than the mountain view. He didn't look like a tourist. He looked like a hunter. Her blood ran cold. She went back to her guest house, her heart pounding, and immediately called Liam on their secure line. "They're here," she said, her voice tight with fear. "I've spotted one. There may be more. Okay, Elara, stay calm." Liam's voice was a steadying presence. "The plan is in place. Are you ready to move to Phase 3? "I'm ready," she said, her hand instinctively going to her now very prominent belly. "Good. The Swiss package is waiting for you. Go now. Don't take anything that connects you to Anna Müller. I'll wipe your digital trail here. Anna Müller will cease to exist within the hour. Be safe, sis." Elara hung up. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. The quiet interlude was over. The war was entering a new phase. She left the guest house with nothing but a small purse. She walked calmly to the train station, but instead of buying a ticket, she went into the restroom. 5 minutes later, a different woman walked out. The mousy brown wig was gone, replaced by a chic black bob. Simple glasses framed her eyes, and a stylish maternity coat replaced the plain one she'd been wearing. She now looked less like a German Hausfrau and more like a wealthy Parisian on a holiday. She bypassed the train and went to the local car rental agency, a pre-booked reservation under her third identity, Chloe Dubois. She drove not east toward Vienna, but west toward the Swiss border. As she drove, a black Audi fell in behind her. It was the man in the tweed jacket. They had found her. They were following her. But this was part of the plan. She wasn't running from them. She was leading them. She drove for 2 hours into the heart of the Alps, the roads becoming more treacherous and winding. She was heading for a specific location. Liam had chosen the Grossglockner High Alpine Road, a famous scenic route that was notoriously dangerous and filled with hairpin turns. As she ascended, the weather turned the sky darkening, and a cold sleet beginning to fall. The black Audi stayed glued to her bumper. They were getting bolder, wanting to corner her. She reached the designated spot, a sharp, blind curve with a steep drop-off on one side. On the other side of the curve, hidden from view, a delivery truck was parked, its driver waiting. The driver was one of Liam's contacts, a former Special Forces soldier from Germany. Elara took a deep breath and floored it. She took the curve at a dangerously high speed. The Audi behind her sped up to keep pace. As Elara rounded the bend, she slammed on her brakes, her car skidding to a halt just behind the parked truck. The Audi, coming around the corner too fast on the slick road, had two choices: plow into the back of the delivery truck or swerve. The driver instinctively swerved. The car's tires screamed as they lost traction on the icy asphalt. For a heart-stopping moment, the Audi teetered on the edge of the road before plunging over the side, tumbling down the rocky embankment in a shower of sparks and shattered glass. Elara didn't wait to see the outcome. The back of the delivery truck opened. Her car was driven inside and the ramp closed. 10 minutes later, the truck drove away, passing the emergency vehicles that were just beginning to arrive at the scene of the tragic accident. Inside the dark, swaying truck, Elara's new life began. 2 days later, a healthy baby boy was born in a private, discreet clinic in Zurich. The news reached Julian a week later. His investigators had been pulled from the wreckage, seriously injured but alive. They had lost her. The trail was ice cold. He had failed. He had lost. He sat in his dark, dusty mansion, a broken man. The last of his money borrowed from Marcus was gone, and then he received an email. It contained no text, just a single attachment. It was a photo, a crystal-clear image of a newborn baby, wrapped in a blue blanket, sleeping peacefully. Beneath it was a PDF document. It was a draft of a divorce settlement. The terms were simple. She would keep a fraction of the money, $50 million, placed in a trust for their son. The rest, over $450 million, would be returned to him. In exchange, he would sign the divorce papers, relinquish all parental rights, and agree to never under any circumstances attempt to contact her or their child ever again. It also contained a link to a website, password protected. The password was Sienna. When he logged in, he saw the neat folders of his blackmail files. The message was clear. Refuse the deal, and his destruction would be absolute and public. It was a checkmate. She hadn't just beaten him. She had shown him mercy, but it was a cruel mercy, a mercy that left him alive, but utterly neutered a king of a diminished and tarnished kingdom. She had left him with the one thing she knew he now cared about more than money, his reputation, and his company. With a shaking hand, Julian Croft picked up the phone and called his lawyer. "Marcus," he said, his voice hollow. "She's won. Get me the papers. I'll sign." In a sun-drenched villa on the coast of Portugal, Elara, now truly free, watched her son sleep in his crib. She had her life back. She had her son. She had won her war. The ghost had defeated the hunter, not by destroying him, but by allowing him to live with the knowledge that she had held his entire world in her hands and had chosen to let it go on her terms. It was the ultimate power and the ultimate victory. Elara's story is a masterclass in strategy, courage, and the fierce, unyielding power of a mother's love. She didn't just get even. She reset the board and rewrote the rules of the game. From the brink of total devastation, she built a fortress to protect her child and secured their freedom. It's a gripping reminder that the quietest people often have the most resilient minds and the strongest wills. What would you have done in her position? Was her response justified, or did she go too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story of strength and cunning resonated with you, and you want to hear more tales of intricate real-life dramas where the stakes are high and the outcomes are never certain, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who appreciates a story of epic revenge, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The air in the conference room of Carter, Dean & Associates was thick with the cloying scent of grief and greed. On one side of the polished mahogany table sat Genevieve Finch, a 58-year-old widow carved from ice, her grief a perfectly tailored black dress and a single strand of pearls. Across from her, practically vibrating with triumphant sorrow, was Sienna Miller. At 29, she was all vibrant youth, her mourning a theatrical display of designer black silk and mascara-laced tears. They were the two women who had loved the late architectural magnate Arthur Finch. And I, Benjamin Carter, his longtime lawyer, was about to read a last will and testament that I knew would detonate a bomb in the middle of their lives. Little did I know the real explosion was yet to come. The reading of a last will and testament is a legal formality, a final cold piece of business. But on that Tuesday afternoon, it felt like a gladiatorial event. The document in my hands, bound in a neat blue folder, felt heavier than its 16 pages. Arthur Finch, my client, and at one time my friend, had been a man of grand designs and even grander appetites. His death from a sudden heart attack on his private jet had been as dramatic as his life. Now his final act was about to play out. Genevieve sat with a ramrod-straight posture, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had been Arthur's wife for 35 years, the quiet, elegant force who had stood beside him as he built Finch & Associates from a two-man operation into a global powerhouse. Her face was a mask of dignified composure, impossible to read. Was it shock? Grief? Or something else entirely? Sienna, on the other hand, was an open book of raw emotion. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her sobs carefully timed to punctuate the silence. She had been Arthur's special project director for the last 3 years, a title as transparent as the sheer sleeves on her dress. She looked at Genevieve not with sympathy, but with a predatory pity, the look of a victor offering condolences to the vanquished. Her lawyer, a slick operator named Dennis Roth, patted her hand reassuringly. "It's okay, Sienna. We're here to honor Arthur's wishes." The emphasis he placed on wishes was a clear shot across the bow. I cleared my throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense room. "We are gathered to execute the last will and testament of Mr. Arthur Alistair Finch, dated March 12th of this year." I saw a flicker in Genevieve's eyes at the date. March 12th, just 6 months ago. It was a new will. My own associate had brought it to my attention only after Arthur's passing, filed separately from the main estate documents I held. Arthur had used a different firm to draft it, a clear sign he was hiding something. I began to read through the usual bequests, donations to the Boston Architectural Guild, a vintage watch for his brother, a trust fund for his nephew. Then I reached the core of the document. Regarding the primary marital residence at 14 Beacon Hill Square, Boston. I read, my voice steady. With all its contents, art and associated property, I bequeath it in its entirety to Miss Sienna Miller. A sharp, audible gasp came from Genevieve's side of the table. Her lawyer, a stoic woman named Maria Flores, placed a steadying hand on her arm. Sienna, however, let out a sob that sounded suspiciously like a cheer, burying her face in her hands. It got worse. Regarding my controlling interest, 51% of the voting shares in Finch & Associates. I continued feeling the weight of every word. I bequeath these shares and the power they hold to Ms. Sienna Miller, with the trust that she will guide my life's work into the future. The room fell into a deathly silence. This wasn't just a disinheritance. It was an erasure. Arthur hadn't just left his wife for a younger woman. He had given her the keys to the kingdom Genevieve had helped build. He had handed over their home, their legacy, their entire life's work. Finally, I arrived at the clause concerning his wife. To my wife, Genevieve Finch. I read the words, feeling like ash in my mouth. I leave the sum of $1 million to be paid from the liquid assets of the estate and the contents of our joint savings account. I trust this will be sufficient for her needs and thank her for the years we shared. $1 million. It sounded like a fortune to most, but for a woman who had lived as Genevieve Finch, it was a pittance, a severance package, an insult of the highest order. Dennis Roth Sienna's lawyer leaned back in his chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. Well, that seems quite clear. My client is of course devastated by her loss, but she is prepared to honor Arthur's final unequivocal wishes. All eyes turned to Genevieve. The Ice Queen, the deposed matriarch. She hadn't shed a tear. Her face remained a placid, unreadable mask. She slowly raised her eyes to meet mine, and for a fleeting second I saw not defeat, but a flicker of something cold and hard, like flint striking steel. She rose gracefully from her chair. "Thank you for your time, Benjamin," she said, her voice even without a tremor. "Maria, we will be in touch." As she walked out of the room, her back as straight as the columns on the buildings her husband designed, a profound unease settled over me. Sienna was already whispering excitedly to her lawyer, planning her new life as the head of a multi-billion-dollar empire. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was not the end. Genevieve Finch was not a woman who simply walked away. This was just the opening move in a war I hadn't yet realized had been declared years ago. Sienna Miller did not wait for the ink on the death certificate to dry. Within a week, she was a whirlwind of motion, establishing her reign. Her first move was on the Beacon Hill mansion. She arrived with a team of movers and interior designers, while Genevieve was still, according to her lawyer, making arrangements. The staff, some of whom had worked for the Finches for decades, were told their loyalty now belonged to Miss Miller. The media-smelling blood descended. Sienna gave a tearful exclusive interview to a high-profile magazine. The photo shoot took place in the grand library of the Finch home. Sienna artfully posed in front of the fireplace, where a portrait of Genevieve had hung for 20 years. In the photos, the wall behind her was conspicuously, brutally bare. Arthur felt so misunderstood in his final years, she cooed to the reporter, dabbing a perfectly formed tear. He wanted innovation, passion. He felt his vision was being stifled. He saw a kindred spirit in me. This isn't about money for me. It's about protecting his legacy. His true legacy. The narrative was clear. She was the vibrant muse, and Genevieve was the cold, uninspired relic of the past. It was a masterful, vicious public relations campaign. Her next move was on the company. She called an emergency board meeting at Finch & Associates. I was required to be there to legally validate the transfer of shares. Sienna swept into the boardroom, flanked by Dennis Roth and a team of freshly hired consultants. She wore a crimson power suit, a stark contrast to the somber grey and navy of the long-standing board members. She laid out her vision, a garbled mix of corporate buzzwords, synergy, disruption, leveraging our brand identity, that made it clear she didn't understand the first thing about architecture or the nuanced business of securing billion-dollar international contracts. The board members, men and women who had respected and in some cases feared Genevieve's sharp intellect, stared at Sienna with thinly veiled contempt. "Arthur's will is clear," Roth interjected smoothly whenever a board member raised a concern. "Ms. Miller is the controlling shareholder. Her vision is the company's vision." Meanwhile, Genevieve was silent, utterly unnervingly silent. Her lawyer, Maria Flores, handled all communication. They filed the standard preliminary objections to the will, citing potential undue influence. But it was a weak boilerplate defense. It felt like a token gesture. Friends who tried to call Genevieve were met with a polite but firm message from her assistant that she was taking time to process her grief. The society pages whispered that she had collapsed, a broken woman hiding away in shame. They said she was a fool who hadn't seen it coming. I found myself increasingly troubled. I'd known Arthur for 20 years. He was brilliant and charming, but also deeply selfish. He had a history of being reckless. But this final act felt different. It was not just cruel, it was self-destructive. To hand his life's work to a novice like Sienna was corporate suicide. It didn't make sense. A week later, I received a package via courier. It was a small, unassuming box. Inside was a single old-fashioned skeleton key and a simple typewritten note with no signature. Benjamin. Sometimes, to understand the present, you must look at the fine print of the past. Storage Unit 42, Portside Archival Services, Chelsea. The key is for the personal safe within. There was no doubt who it was from. Portside Archival was a high-security, climate-controlled facility where law firms and corporations stored sensitive documents. Why would Genevieve send me there? Why the secrecy? And what fine print was I supposed to be looking for? The unease in my gut sharpened into something more urgent. I looked out my office window at the Boston skyline, a view dominated by 3 gleaming towers designed by Finch and Associates. Genevieve had been there for every single one. She had negotiated the land deals, smoothed over zoning disputes, and charmed the foreign investors. She wasn't just Arthur's wife. She was the silent architect of his empire. The idea that she would surrender it all without a fight was ludicrous. The silence wasn't defeat. It was preparation, and she had just sent me her husband's lawyer to find the ammunition. The Portside Archival Facility in Chelsea was a fortress of concrete and steel, a library of secrets kept under lock and key. The air inside was cool and dry-smelling of old paper and preservation chemicals. After presenting my credentials and the key, I was led down a long, sterile corridor to Unit 42. The unit was filled with dozens of bankers' boxes, all meticulously labeled F&A Dubai Tower Project, 2011-2014. Finch Personal Tax Returns, 2000-2010. It was a complete archive of Arthur's professional and personal life. In the back corner of the room stood a heavy black iron safe, the kind that looks like it could survive a direct hit. The skeleton key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. Inside, there weren't stacks of gold or bearer bonds. There were more documents, but these felt different. They were bound in dark red leather, not standard office folders. The top file was labeled simply AF and GF, Personal Matter, Summer 2015. Summer of 2015. I racked my brain. What happened then? It was the year Finch and Associates secured the massive contract for the Singapore Marina complex. It was their biggest triumph. Professionally, Arthur was at the top of his game. But personally, I recalled a period of tension. Arthur had been erratic cancelling meetings. Genevieve had taken a solo trip to Europe for a month, which was unusual. At the time, I'd chalked it up to the stress of the Singapore deal. Now I suspected there was more to it. I opened the folder. The first documents were from a private investigator. The grainy photographs were of Arthur with another woman. Not Sienna Miller. This was someone else, a decade ago, a landscape architect from one of their projects. The report detailed their affair with cold, clinical precision dates, times hotel receipts. It was a classic sordid tale of infidelity. The next set of documents was correspondence between Genevieve's and Arthur's lawyers from that time. Not me. They had used different counsel, keeping it firewalled from their business life. The letters were brutal. Genevieve had filed for divorce. She was prepared to go to war. Her initial petition demanded 70% of the company, citing a breach of fiduciary duty and the use of marital assets to fund the affair. It would have been a corporate bloodbath. A public, messy divorce at that exact moment would have spooked the Singaporean investors and potentially scuttled the biggest deal of their lives. Arthur would have been ruined, not just financially but professionally. The scandal would have shattered the carefully curated image of the stable, brilliant power couple that had so impressed their international partners. Then I saw the draft of a withdrawal of the divorce petition. It was dated August 2015. He had clearly begged her to come back to save the company, to save him. She had agreed. But Genevieve Finch was not a sentimental woman. She hadn't just forgiven him. She had negotiated. And that's when I found it at the very bottom of the red leather folder. It was a document so legally precise, so breathtakingly ruthless, that I had to read it twice to fully grasp its implications. It was titled Post-Nuptial Reconciliation and Forfeiture Agreement. It was a contract signed by both Arthur Alistair Finch and Genevieve Marie Finch on September 1st, 2015, and witnessed by their respective lawyers. It was a masterpiece of legal warfare drafted by the best divorce attorneys money could buy. The preamble stated that in consideration of Genevieve Finch withdrawing her petition for divorce and resuming the marital relationship, Arthur Finch agreed to a series of permanent, irrevocable conditions. My eyes scanned the clauses, my heart rate quickening. Clause 1 established that the entirety of their shared assets, including all shares in Finch and Associates, were to be legally defined as a single, indivisible marital estate co-owned by Genevieve, regardless of whose name was on the title. Clause 2 was a standard lifestyle and fidelity clause, with both parties agreeing to conduct themselves with the respect and faithfulness befitting the marital contract. But Clause 3 was the kill shot. I read it aloud in the silent cold room. Clause 3. The forfeiture provision. In the event that Arthur A. Finch is found to have engaged in any future act of infidelity, defined as a romantic or sexual relationship with any third party, this agreement shall trigger an immediate and automatic forfeiture. Any and all wills, codicils, or testamentary dispositions made by Arthur A. Finch, subsequent to the date of this agreement, that bequeath any portion of the primary marital estate, including but not limited to real property, financial accounts, or shares in Finch and Associates, to a third party involved in said infidelity, shall be rendered null and void. My breath hitched. It didn't stop there. Furthermore, I continued reading upon such a triggering event, Arthur A. Finch's entire share of the marital estate, including his controlling interest in Finch and Associates, shall be immediately and irrevocably transferred to Genevieve M. Finch. This transfer shall supersede any subsequent will or testament. This document shall serve as the final and binding directive concerning the disposition of the marital estate." I leaned back against a stack of boxes, the folder in my hand. This wasn't just a contract. It was a time bomb, a dead man's switch. Genevieve had discovered Arthur's first affair in 2015, on the brink of a divorce that would have cost him everything she had offered him a deal. She would stay, save his company, and preserve his reputation. In return, he had to sign this contract, effectively putting a gun to his own head. He had to gamble that he could keep his indiscretions secret for the rest of his life. He had gambled and lost. His affair with Sienna Miller hadn't just been a betrayal of his marriage vows. It had triggered a legal mechanism that disinherited him from his own life. The new will he wrote, the one leaving everything to Sienna, wasn't just invalid. The very act of creating it, of trying to give his company and home to his mistress, was the final nail in his coffin. He had signed his own financial death warrant 10 years ago. Sienna Miller didn't own Finch and Associates. According to this document, every share, every brick, every dollar belonged to the woman she had so smugly dismissed. The silent widow wasn't silent. She was waiting, and she had just handed me the weapon. Returning to my office, the city lights outside seemed to mock the dark, intricate web I was now a part of. The reconciliation and forfeiture agreement was a thing of brutal beauty. It was ironclad, specific, and merciless. Genevieve had known about Sienna all along. She hadn't been a victim in the dark. She had been a predator waiting for the perfect moment to spring her trap. Arthur's death had been that moment. My professional duty was clear. I represented Arthur's estate, and my primary obligation was to ensure its assets were distributed according to his last legal and binding instructions. The will from March was now a fraudulent document, invalidated by a superior pre-existing contract. The true binding directive was the 2015 agreement. The next morning, I called Maria Flores, Genevieve's lawyer. "Maria, it's Benjamin Carter. I believe I have come into possession of a document that radically alters the landscape of the Finch estate." There was a pause on the other end, but I could almost hear the faint smile in her voice. "Oh, do tell Benjamin. A post-nuptial agreement from September 2015. I trust you're familiar with it." "I am," she said, her tone crisp and professional. "My client believed it was important for the executor of the estate to discover it through proper channels to ensure the chain of custody was unimpeachable. You found it in the archives, I presume?" "I did," I replied. Understanding the strategy. She didn't just hand it to me. She made me find it, making me the independent verifier of its existence. It was brilliant. I'll need to validate the signatures and the notarization, but it appears to be legally sound. "It is," Maria confirmed. "We have the original signed counterparts in our possession, along with sworn affidavits from the witnesses. It will stand up to any challenge." The game was now in motion. Our first step was to file an emergency motion with the probate court, asserting the supremacy of the 2015 agreement over the 2025 will. We attached a certified copy of the contract and a detailed brief explaining how the forfeiture clause had been triggered by Arthur's well-documented relationship with Sienna Miller. The effect was instantaneous. A temporary injunction was placed on the execution of the will. Sienna Miller's assets were frozen. The transfer of shares in Finch and Associates was halted. The Queen was suddenly locked out of her own castle. I received a call from Dennis Roth within an hour of the filing. He was incandescent with rage. "What is this nonsense, Carter? Some phantom document from a decade ago. This is a desperate, pathetic attempt by a scorned woman to subvert a man's dying wish. It's a legally executed contract, Dennis, I said calmly. And it appears Arthur breached that contract in the most spectacular way possible. Your client wasn't just his mistress. She was the trigger for his own complete and total disinheritance. The will he wrote for her is the very proof of the breach that nullifies it. It's a perfect paradox. He sputtered threatening lawsuits and accusations of professional misconduct, but I could hear the fear beneath the bluster. He knew a document like this could be a silver bullet. Sienna's reaction was far more public. She called a press conference on the steps of the Beacon Hill mansion, the mansion she was now barred from entering. "This is a travesty," she cried, a camera-ready tear rolling down her cheek. "Genevieve Finch is trying to use a dusty, forgotten piece of paper to steal what Arthur wanted me to have. He loved me. He knew I was the future of his company. This is a bitter woman's revenge, and it defiles the memory of a great man." The media ate it up, framing it as a dramatic battle, the grieving mistress versus the vengeful wife. But in the halls of law and high finance, the narrative was very different. A contract is a contract, and Arthur Finch had signed his name on the dotted line. The days that followed were a flurry of legal activity. We deposed the private investigator who had documented the original affair in 2015. We gathered evidence of Arthur's relationship with Sienna, and it was overwhelming. Credit card statements showed him paying for her apartment, buying her cars, funding a lavish lifestyle. Flight manifests showed them traveling together. Dozens of people at Finch & Associates were willing to testify about the nature of their relationship. Sienna and her lawyer tried to countersue, claiming the 2015 agreement was signed under duress, that it was unconscionable. But we had the records. Arthur had his own high-powered legal team advising him. He wasn't a victim. He was a desperate man who made a calculated risk. He chose his company over his freedom to cheat and then tried to have both. Through it all, Genevieve remained out of the public eye. She was orchestrating everything from the quiet of her rented suite at the Ritz-Carlton. She reviewed every document, approved every strategic decision. She was no longer just a client. She was my commander-in-chief. One evening she summoned me to her suite. The room was understated elegant, with a commanding view of the Boston Public Garden. She was standing by the window, looking down at the city lights. "Sienna is growing desperate," she said without turning around. "She's going to get reckless. We need to be ready." "Her legal position is crumbling," I assured her. "Roth knows he's going to lose." "This isn't about the law anymore, Benjamin," she said, finally turning to face me. Her eyes were clear and intense. "This is about power. Sienna tried to take my home, my company, and my name. She thought she was taking them from a dead man. She's about to find out she was trying to take them from me." She was right. The following day, Sienna made her most reckless move yet. Desperate to prove the will was Arthur's true intention, she leaked what she believed was her trump card. Intimate handwritten love letters from Arthur, promising her the world. She thought she was proving his love. What she actually did was hand us the final irrefutable proof of the affair, signed in the decedent's own hand. She had just personally delivered the nail for her own coffin. The board was set. It was time for checkmate. The release of Arthur's letters was a strategic blunder of epic proportions. Dennis Roth must have advised against it, but Sienna, driven by ego and desperation, clearly overruled him. She saw them as a testament to her power over Arthur. The world, and more importantly the court, saw them as Exhibit A in Genevieve's case. The letters were flowery dramatic and filled with the kinds of promises a man makes when he's trying to impress a much younger woman. My darling Sienna, one read. Genevieve is the past, a black and white photograph in a dusty album. You are the future in glorious color. Everything I have built will one day be yours to command. The house, the firm, they are soulless without a vibrant soul like you to inhabit them. Posted on a popular gossip blog, they were meant to humiliate Genevieve and sway public opinion. In reality, they became the centerpiece of our motion for summary judgment. We no longer needed flight manifests or credit card receipts. Sienna herself had provided a signed confession from her deceased lover. The preliminary hearing was set. It wasn't a full trial, but a hearing before the probate judge to rule on our motion. The question was simple. Did the 2015 reconciliation and forfeiture agreement supersede the 2025 will? The courtroom was packed. Sienna arrived in what could only be described as defiant mourning, a chic black dress with a plunging neckline, her face a mask of determined victimhood. Genevieve entered moments later clad in a simple, elegant navy blue suit. She looked not like a litigant, but like a CEO attending a board meeting she was certain to win. She radiated an aura of absolute unshakable control. Dennis Roth argued first, his voice booming with manufactured outrage. He called the 2015 agreement a relic of a troubled time, an instrument of coercion, and an affront to testamentary freedom. He painted Arthur as a man trapped in a loveless marriage who found true happiness at the end of his life and whose final wishes were being desecrated by a vengeful ex-partner. "Are we to believe, Your Honor," he thundered, "that a man of Arthur Finch's stature would sign away his entire legacy over a single decade-old mistake? It is unconscionable." Then Maria Flores rose to speak. She was the opposite of Roth, calm, precise, and devastatingly methodical. "Your Honor," she began, her voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. "Mr. Roth speaks of a single mistake. We are not here to debate Mr. Finch's morality. We are here to discuss contract law. In 2015, Arthur Finch was on the verge of a divorce that would have cost him his company. To save it, he freely and with the advice of excellent counsel entered into a binding post-nuptial agreement." She walked the judge through the contract clause by clause. Her presentation was a masterclass in legal clarity. "This document is not a relic," she stated coolly. "It is a self-executing contract. It contains a condition and a consequence. The condition is fidelity. The consequence for breaking that condition is forfeiture. It's that simple." She then turned to the evidence. "Ordinarily, proving the breach of such a condition would require a great deal of evidence. Fortunately for us, Ms. Miller has made our job exceedingly easy." She projected the leaked love letters onto a large screen in the courtroom. There, in Arthur's own looping script, were the promises, the declarations of love, the explicit confirmation of their relationship. In his letter dated February 4th of this year, Maria said, pointing to a specific passage, "Mr. Finch promises to give Miss Miller and I, quote, everything I have built. This, Your Honor, is not only proof of the affair that triggered the forfeiture clause, but it is a clear statement of the intent that led to the creation of the now voided will." Sienna stared at her own evidence, her face draining of color. The words that she saw as her validation were being used as the very weapons to destroy her claim. She began whispering furiously to Dennis Roth, who could only shake his head, his face grim. "The will of March 12th, Maria concluded, is not a valid legal document. It is merely the final documented proof of the breach of contract that occurred in 2015. The moment Arthur Finch began his relationship with Miss Miller, let alone wrote her these letters, and drafted that will he forfeited his entire share of the marital estate to his wife, Genevieve Finch. The will is an attempt to give away assets that were no longer his to give. He was, in effect, a dead man, walking financially speaking. He just didn't know it yet. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Harriet Cole, listened intently, her expression unreadable. She reviewed the documents in front of her, occasionally peering over her glasses at Sienna, then at Genevieve. The silence stretched on. Finally, she looked up. "I have reviewed the 2015 agreement, the 2025 will, and the briefs submitted by both parties," she stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. "The language of the post-nuptial agreement is clear and unambiguous. It was signed by both parties with legal representation. Its terms, while severe, are not illegal or unconscionable. A deal is a deal." She fixed her gaze on Dennis Roth. "The evidence demonstrating a breach of the fidelity clause is frankly overwhelming, much of it helpfully supplied by your own client." A ripple of muted laughter went through the lawyers in the gallery. "Therefore," Judge Cole declared, her gavel raised, "the court finds in favor of the petitioner. The Reconciliation and Forfeiture Agreement of September 1st, 2015, is hereby affirmed as the controlling legal document in the disposition of the Finch estate. The will dated March 12, 2025, is declared null and void. All assets of the estate are to be transferred to Mrs. Genevieve Finch, effective immediately. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. Sienna Miller let out a strangled cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief. It was over. In the space of a single sentence, her billion-dollar inheritance had vanished. Her dreams of mansions and corporate power dissolved into thin air. She was left with nothing but the $1 million severance package Arthur had insultingly left his wife, and even that was now in question, as it was to be paid from an estate that no longer belonged to him. She turned her face contorted with rage and screamed at Genevieve, who was calmly gathering her papers. "You snake! You planned this! You let him do this!" Genevieve paused and looked at Sienna for the first time that day. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a chilling final dismissal. "No," she said, her voice clear and cold. "Arthur did this. You were just the instrument of his self-destruction. Enjoy the memories. They're all you have left." With that, she turned and walked out of the courtroom, not looking back, leaving the ruins of Sienna Miller's future scattered on the floor behind her. In the aftermath of the court's decision, Sienna Miller's world imploded with breathtaking speed. The press, which had once fawned over her as the tragic, beautiful heiress, turned on her with savage glee. She was now a laughingstock, the greedy mistress who had been outplayed at every turn. Creditors for the lavish lifestyle she had been living on Arthur's dime came calling. The crimson power suit and designer dresses were quickly replaced by a harried, hunted look as she dodged reporters outside the modest apartment she was now forced to rent. Her 15 minutes of fame were over. Finch and Associates, on the other hand, experienced a renaissance. The day after the ruling, Genevieve Finch walked through the doors of the headquarters, not as the founder's widow, but as the sole, undisputed owner. She called an immediate all-hands meeting. Standing before the firm's top architects, engineers, and executives, she was a figure of pure authority. "For the last few years," she began, her voice resonating with quiet power, "this firm has been adrift, chasing fleeting trends and vanity projects. That ends today. Arthur Finch was a brilliant designer, but he lost sight of the foundation we built this company on: integrity, quality, and a commitment to creating lasting value. I was there when the first brick was laid, and I am here now to ensure this legacy endures. There was no talk of synergy or disruption. She spoke of concrete plans, re-establishing relationships with old clients, bidding on a major infrastructure project in Germany, and investing in sustainable design technology. She knew the business inside and out because she had helped build it. The relief in the room was palpable. The board, which had bristled under Sienna's chaotic vision, gave Genevieve a unanimous vote of confidence. The silent partner had finally taken her rightful place at the head of the table. A few weeks later, once the legal dust had settled and the transfer of all assets was complete, Genevieve asked me to dinner. We went to a quiet, old-world restaurant in the North End, a place she and Arthur had frequented in their early days. "I owe you my thanks, Benjamin," she said, raising her glass of wine. "You handled this with discretion and skill." "I was just following the legal trail you laid out for me, Genevieve," I replied. "But I have to ask, why wait? You could have stopped him at any point. Why let him write the will? Why let it get all the way to a public reading?" Genevieve took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes thoughtful. "If I had confronted him while he was alive," she explained, "he would have tried to fight me. He would have used the company's money to hire armies of lawyers to try and invalidate our agreement. It would have been a long, ugly public war that would have damaged the firm immeasurably. He would have painted me as the villain, the controlling wife holding him back." She looked out the window, a flicker of old pain in her expression. "He did that once before in 2015. He told me the contract was just a piece of paper, a formality to calm me down. He believed he was smarter than any contract, smarter than any lawyer, smarter than me. So you waited," I said, the full, cold scope of her strategy dawning on me. "I waited," she confirmed. "I let him believe he was getting away with it. I let him dig his own grave, write his own confession in the form of a will, and name his accomplice. By letting him go through with it, he made my case for me, posthumously and indisputably. There was no he said, she said. There was only his actions, his signature on a will giving away things he no longer owned, and a contract he had clearly violated. It was clean. Final. It was breathtaking in its patient, cold-blooded brilliance. She hadn't just won a legal case. She had executed a flawless, decade-long strategy. She had given Arthur enough rope, knowing his hubris would eventually lead him to hang himself. "It was never about the money, Benjamin," she said quietly, her voice softening for the first time. "I could have retired comfortably 12 times over. It was about this." She gestured vaguely towards the city outside. "Our life's work. Finch and Associates. He was going to hand it over to a child who would have run it into the ground within 5 years. I spent 35 years of my life building that company. I wasn't going to let his final foolish act of vanity be its epitaph." She had protected the legacy not from an outside threat, but from the man who helped create it. The reconciliation and forfeiture agreement hadn't been an act of revenge conceived in the heat of the moment. It had been a contingency plan, a fail-safe against the predictable patterns of the man she knew better than anyone. As I left the restaurant that night and walked through the streets of Boston, I looked at the gleaming Finch towers that defined the skyline. I had always seen them as Arthur's monuments. I realized now they were hers. They were monuments to a woman's resolve, a silent promise she had made to herself, and a contract that had finally and irrevocably been executed. The mistress never stood a chance. She wasn't fighting a grieving widow. She was fighting a master architect who had designed her own victory long before the battle ever began. The story of the Finch inheritance became a cautionary tale whispered in the exclusive clubs and boardrooms of Boston. It was a story about pride, about underestimating the quiet ones, and about the long memory of a contract. Sienna Miller faded into obscurity, a footnote in a billionaire's biography. Her attempts to sue for a portion of the estate were dismissed summarily, leaving her with staggering legal debts. Her name was now synonymous with spectacular failure. Genevieve Finch, however, flourished. Freed from the shadow of her charismatic but erratic husband, she came into her own as a leader. She proved to be more than just a silent partner. She was a visionary. She sold the company's private jet, calling it a needless extravagance, and reinvested the money into an employee profit-sharing program and a charitable foundation dedicated to providing scholarships for underprivileged architecture students. Morale at the firm soared. She sold the Beacon Hill mansion, stripping it of the opulent, cold grandeur Arthur had favored, and moved into a sleek, modern penthouse overlooking the Charles River. It was a space that was entirely her own, filled with contemporary art and light. It was the home of a woman looking forward, not back. I continued to serve as the firm's primary legal counsel, and my meetings with Genevieve were a study in efficiency and sharp intellect. She never spoke of Arthur or Sienna again. The past was a closed chapter, a foundation upon which she was now building something new, and in many ways better. One afternoon, about a year after the court case, she called me to her office for a final piece of business related to the old estate. As I was packing my briefcase to leave, I paused. "Genevieve," I asked, "that key you sent me, the one for the storage unit, how did you know I would be the one to open it? Arthur could have appointed someone else as executor in that final will." She looked up from her desk, a small, knowing smile on her face. It was the first time I had ever seen her look genuinely amused. Benjamin Arthur was a creature of habit, and in his own way of loyalty. He was always going to name you as his executor. He trusted you. He just never imagined what you would be executing. She paused, then added the final piece of the puzzle. And besides the storage facility, had standing instructions. If anyone other than you or Arthur had tried to access that unit, they were to be denied access, and I was to be immediately notified. It was, as they say, a contingency plan for the contingency plan. I could only shake my head in admiration. She had thought of everything, every angle, every possibility. She hadn't left a single thing to chance. As I walked out of the gleaming skyscraper that day, I realized the true nature of the secret contract. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a reflection of Genevieve herself, precise, patient, unbreachable, and ultimately triumphant. She had weathered the affair, the betrayal, and the public humiliation, all while holding a winning hand. She refused to play until the stakes were highest. She hadn't just claimed an inheritance. She had reclaimed her life, her company, and her story, cementing a legacy far more enduring than any building forged of glass and steel. 5 years is a long time. Long enough for a city's skyline to change, and for the echoes of a scandal to fade into the quiet hum of history. The dramatic tale of the Finch inheritance was no longer front-page news, but for those of us who had been in the room, its lessons were etched in stone. I saw Sienna Miller one last time, not in a courtroom or on a television screen, but on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was meeting a client at a cafe in Brookline, a pleasant but unremarkable suburb, far from the stately grandeur of Beacon Hill. She was there showing a young couple a brochure for a new condominium development. She was a real estate agent. She wore a sensible pantsuit, and her hair was a more subdued shade of blonde. Her smile was the same, the one that had charmed Arthur Finch. but the ambition in her eyes had been replaced by the strained, hollow brightness of someone working on commission. She was selling 2-bedroom units with granite countertops and a shared gym. It was a life, but a universe away from the empire she had almost grasped. Our eyes met for a brief, fleeting second. There was no flicker of recognition, or perhaps she chose not to see me. She simply turned back to her clients, pointing to a floor plan, her voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. In that moment, she wasn't a villain or a home wrecker. She was simply irrelevant. The world she had tried to conquer, however, had never been more relevant. Genevieve Finch did not just save her company. She remade it. Under her leadership, the firm became more innovative, more respected, and more profitable than ever before. She had established the Genevieve M. Finch Foundation for Architectural Innovation, which was now one of the most prestigious grant-giving bodies for young architects in the world. She was no longer seen as Arthur Finch's widow, but as a titan of the industry in her own right. The matriarch, as the younger employees respectfully called her. Last month, she summoned me to her office, the one with the panoramic view of the city she had shaped. The purpose of the meeting was to sign the final documents for a major corporate restructuring. "Benjamin, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk. "There's one final change." She slid a document across the polished desk. It was a corporate resolution to formally change the name of the firm. I read the new name, and I couldn't help but smile. "The Meridian Group," I read aloud. "A new direction." "A true direction," she corrected gently. Finch and Associates was a partnership, but it was built on a flawed foundation. It carried the name of a brilliant man who nearly destroyed it. Meridian is built on something stronger. "On what?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. She looked out the window, her gaze sweeping across the skyline, a landscape of her triumphs. "On clarity," she said. "The kind of clarity that only comes when you sign your name to something and understand every single word, every consequence, every promise. The kind of clarity that contract gave me all those years ago." In that moment, I understood the full arc of her story. The reconciliation and forfeiture agreement was not her masterpiece of revenge. It was merely the blueprint. It was the necessary legal foundation she had to lay to protect her life's work. The life and the legacy she built in the years that followed, that was the true structure. A skyscraper built not on a man's name, but on a woman's unshakable resolve. I thought I understood the final chapter of Genevieve Finch's story. The victory was absolute, her new legacy, with the Meridian Group secure. The past had been settled, the debts paid, the ghosts laid to rest. I believed the book was closed. And then she decided to build one last thing. The invitation arrived on my desk 2 years later. It was for the dedication of the new School of Architecture at Boston University, a state-of-the-art facility, funded by a single anonymous donor. Now the donor was to be revealed. I knew it was Genevieve, her latest act of philanthropy. I attended out of respect, expecting a ceremony celebrating the Meridian Group and the bright future of design. I stood in the crowd of academics, students, and city officials in the building's magnificent central atrium. Genevieve, now in her late 60s, took the stage. She looked serene, not like a victor, but like a founder. The university president spoke glowingly of her generosity and vision, and then he gestured to the marble wall beside the stage where a brass plaque was to be unveiled. As the velvet cloth was pulled away, a collective gasp went through the few people in the crowd who knew the history. I felt the air leave my own lungs. The name on the wall did not say the Meridian Group. It did not say the Genevieve M. Finch Atrium. It read the Arthur Finch Memorial Wing for Applied Design. The name hit me with the force of a physical blow. After the betrayal, the humiliation, the epic legal war to erase his final act. Why would she carve his name into the stone of her ultimate legacy? It felt like a capitulation, a final inexplicable surrender. Then Genevieve stepped to the podium, and the room fell silent. "A building like a life is complex," she began, her voice calm and clear. "It has a foundation which must be strong and true, and it has a facade, the face it shows to the world. Sometimes they tell different stories." She looked out at the sea of young, aspiring architects. Arthur Finch was a brilliant architect. His vision, his spark, was undeniable. For those of you who study his work, you will find a genius for light and form. That spark deserves to be remembered, and it deserves to inspire others. A murmur went through the audience. She paused, letting the words settle. "But a spark alone is not enough to build something that lasts," she continued, her voice gaining a steely edge. "It needs structure. It needs integrity. It needs a clear and honest purpose. That is the work we do now at the Meridian Group. That is the lesson I hope you all take from your time here." She turned slightly and gestured to the plaque bearing her late husband's name. "This wing is not about rewriting history. It is about learning from it. My message to you is simple. Take the spark of genius wherever you find it. Admire it. Study it. But build upon it with a foundation of integrity. Let your talent be guided by your character. Because a beautiful design with a flawed foundation will eventually crumble." It was the most remarkable speech I had ever heard. In a few masterfully chosen words, she had done the impossible. She had honored the talent of the man she once loved, while simultaneously delivering a final, devastating critique of his character. She hadn't resurrected his reputation. She had entombed it, defining it on her own terms for all of history. After the ceremony, I found her standing by a window overlooking the campus green. "Genevieve," I said, my voice full of awe. "Of all the things I expected, this wasn't one of them." She turned to me, a faint, peaceful smile on her lips. "He was a part of my life for 35 years, Benjamin. A vital part of the story. You don't build a future by trying to erase the past. You put it in its proper place." She looked back at the plaque. "Now his name is attached to a place of learning. A single wing, not the whole building. It is a lesson, not a monument. I think that's a fitting legacy." It was her final, greatest act of power. Not winning the money, not seizing the company, but the ultimate power to write the narrative. To decide with wisdom and grace how the story would be told forever. She had not just won the war. She had curated the peace that followed on her own unassailable terms. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a mistress trying to steal a fortune. It was a lesson in the immense power of quiet intelligence and strategic patience. While Sienna Miller played a loud public game of emotion and entitlement, Genevieve Finch played a silent game of chess, planning her moves a decade in advance. She proved that the most powerful contracts aren't always about money. They're about foresight, and that true victory doesn't always come from a loud battle, but from the quiet, inevitable click of a perfectly laid trap. Whose side were you on as the story unfolded? Did you suspect the widow's silence was a weapon all along? If you were captivated by Genevieve's long game and the dramatic downfall of a would-be heiress, please let us know in the comments below. Your engagement helps us bring more real-life dramas like this to light. Don't forget to hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves a good twist, and subscribe to the channel for more tales of justice, revenge, and fortunes won and lost. Thank you for listening.